Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Normally after a trial they say the jury is in, but as black people know only too well under white supremacy, the fix is in. Now, we can be disgusted with the verdict in the Daniel Penny trial, but don't you try to act surprised. The fix was in from the very jump. First, the mayor of New York City himself, Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD, and the governor both applauded, praised, and lauded the murder of Jordan Neely. Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD said that people were tired of homeless folks harassing them. But the racist witch who's the governor of the state, Kathy Hochul, was even more strident, saying there's consequences for behavior.
You are homeless in our subways, many of them in the throes of mental health episodes, and that's what I believe are some of the factors involved here. And people, there's consequences for behavior, and I look at it more closely.
Now, they have never ever spoken that way about the killing of anyone for any reason. But in this case, they wanted to set a certain tone. This killing in particular was one that made them say, well, we need to be openly telling people this is what we need more of. Keep in mind, Jordan Neely had not harmed anyone. Jordan Neely had not struck anyone. Jordan Neely had not punched, hit, slapped, or even touched anyone. The only person who put their hands on anyone else was Daniel Penny, and him alone. So these two pieces of trash sitting here reveling in that murder, that tells you everything you need to know. This is not about the act itself as much as it was who it was against. Daniel Penny snuck up behind Mr. Neely and strangled him to death and continued his chokehold even after bystanders told him to stop. He knew full well what he was doing. The white media nonstop was repeating, he's a Marine, he's a Marine. We know nothing about his disciplinary record, nothing about any complaints against him. That was deliberate. The white media had been covering up for this guy from the jump. But keep in mind, as a former Marine, this punk knew full well what the military's rules of engagement are. What he did would have gotten him court-martialed if he had tried that on a foreign battlefield. But then again, when fighting a race war against black people, all's fair, right? This is what was going on in New York City before this trial. They were setting the ground from the very beginning that they wanted the public on his side. Facts be damned. He knew what he was doing, and he also knew that because he's white and his victim was black, the system would swing into action to protect him, which it did. The mayor of New York City and the governor of the state didn't even try to conceal their glee and support for this murder, even though they didn't know anything about it other than the colors of the victims, and for them, that was enough. Now, the trial eventually occurred, but you have Alvin Bragg, who dreams every day of making it into the higher echelons of American politics, so you could tell from the beginning this clown clearly wasn't going to give it the old college try, and when it came time for the jury selection process, he made sure to just sit back and let a jury be impaneled who would be completely and thoroughly sympathetic with this killer. This is the reason why I keep telling you the voir dire process, jury selection process, is absolutely crucial to getting a just verdict. The composition of the jury means a hell of a lot to whether or not there's going to be an actual trial of the facts or whether or not you're going to be allowing blatant jury nullification. Last week, the jury began deliberating, and day after day passed. Eventually, by Friday, the jury had said that they couldn't come to a unanimous verdict regarding the charge of second-degree manslaughter. Now, under these circumstances, you might think that the judge would declare a mistrial and say, well, the jury can't come to a verdict, so the prosecutor needs to decide whether or not they'll bring these charges at a later time with a different jury. But the fix was in because Alvin Bragg was the one who told the judge to go ahead and throw out the second-degree manslaughter charge and go with criminally negligent homicide instead, which was a lower offense. Bragg miscalculated, though. What he thought was going to happen was that by going with a lower charge, it would lead to an immediate unanimous verdict of acquittal, and since it was a Friday, this would all be buried with the weekend media dump. But the jury, it seemed, wasn't as eager to give that unanimous acquittal as Bragg had thought, because they didn't give a verdict on Friday. In fact, they didn't give one until yesterday. So instead of the immediate miscarriage of justice being buried with the media Friday dump like Bragg hoped, instead, it's getting the attention it deserves. Bragg was no innocent bystander in all this. He was an active participant. When he dropped all charges against another racist, Mia Ponsetto, the so-called Soho Karen who attacked a black child in public, he did it because he wanted to signal strongly to white power that he's on the team, and he's willing to go and bend over backwards to give total immunity to violent racists who attack black people. That's what he was doing in that case. Bootlicks above all others know the rules of racism, and this is how they let white power know that they're going to be a good little boy for massa. So I think any thinking person would understand that this was not a trial at all. It was merely judicial theater put on for the benefit of the public. And why did they feel like they had to do this? Well, do you remember what happened immediately following the murder of Jordan Neely? The white media protected Daniel Penny's identity for days after the murder. Not just hours, but days. Public protests went on day after day in New York City, and the white media refused to reveal the killer's identity. Oh, they would report on the protests because they didn't have a choice. It was blocking all the streets. But the white media, all of them, pretended like they didn't know who the killer was. Now, that's something that's completely unheard of in any case like this. And it wasn't just one or two white media outlets who did it. It was all of them who were on code for this. Remember, go back in the archives of this channel. You can go ahead and get the play-by-play on that one. This wasn't just the big agenda-setting media outlets like the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CNN who were covering for this guy. This was every single white media news outlet across the board. They were all on code, bending over backward to protect this creep. We are up against an anti-black united propaganda front here. It was only because of a foreign white media outlet that published his name that people found out finally who the killer was. And even then, they tried to take it back. The name of this murderer finally became public as it should have been from the start. And only then did the New York Police Department suddenly feel compelled to arrest this murderer. But they didn't want to do it before. The white media, realizing that their attempts to conceal the identity of this race killer and sweep this hate crime under the rug had failed, decided that they would try another tactic. Lie constantly and just claim that this was actually all about homelessness. Oh, the public thinks it's about race. That's just incidental. This is actually about the plight of the unhoused. This phony, faux white liberal pap that they were doing, they plastered that talking point everywhere. They made it clear that they wouldn't even acknowledge race as a factor in this crime at all. As far as they were concerned, this was a mental health issue. So instead of ignoring the identity of the murderer, since they couldn't do that anymore, instead they flooded the zone with this orgy of phony white media pieces claiming that Jordan Neely was failed by the welfare state, that politicians didn't care about the plight of the homeless. That's the tragedy here. And the white media didn't mind pushing that lie because white supremacy is not based on mistreating the homeless. It's based exclusively on oppressing and harming black people with impunity. The white right and people like Hawkle and Officer Eric Adams weren't cheering on this murder because Jordan Neely was some avatar for the homeless. They praised it because to them he was an example of a black person killed by a white person with impunity if they could work it the right way. They wanted a white right to murder to be validated and protected. That's what this meant to them because they've been taking so many L's in every other court case. Look what happened in Texas when you had another killer by the name of Daniel Perry who murdered a white BLM activist. Perry was convicted of the murder, but Governor Greg Abbott, at the urging of Tucker Carlson, suddenly decided that he didn't trust Texas juries anymore, so he gave a pardon to this murderer, not because he thought that Perry didn't commit the crime, but precisely because he knew that he had. We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power Tools. Because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. So you have the media and the politicians both working together on code to conceal the identity of the murderer and to make sure that if anybody talks about it, well, we're going to misdirect them and mislead them intentionally and tell them this is not about race at all. It's about the homeless. And we'll just scream that morning, noon, and night because we don't want anyone thinking this is racial. They went completely out of their way to an obscene degree to push that lie. The plan from the very beginning was to engineer a way to quietly bury the murder of Jordan Neely and let the killer go without so much as a by your leave. That's what the plan was, and the white media was fully on board with covering up this murder. They were all working hand in hand. Those were the circumstances that were going on before Daniel Penny was even arrested. You had the white media and these government officials like Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD and Kathy Hochul covering for this guy, praising this guy, telling the public, oh, there was no crime here. They were trying to really test the waters on this one. Now, if Daniel Penny had been black and Jordan Neely had been white, none of this cover-up or refusal to arrest would have ever happened. The white media would have gone ahead and said his identity before he was even in handcuffs. He would have been thrown to the ground, slapped in handcuffs, and most likely shot on sight as soon as the first NYPD flatfoot showed up. And for any white supremacist trash lurking here, please tell us of any time that a black man killed a white person and the cops refused to arrest him, the white media refused to publicize his name, prosecutors refused to bring charges, and the judge threw out charges during the jury's deliberation. I'll wait. But the white supremacists already knew this is their white privilege. As black people, we really underestimate how many L's we've made these bastards take. We serve the white supremacist trash their hairy inbred behinds on a daily basis. Now, because we haven't broken their backs yet, we tend to tell ourselves that our efforts are less effective than they really are. But the enemy certainly understands how much pain we've put on them. Ask Kamala Harris. Ask all these little white supremacists about the uprisings of 2020. Ask them about their boy Derek Chauvin. Ask them about the parade of cops who are being dragged into court and then thrown into prison cells. These guys hate it because of the fact that we have established a new normal, and now they're desperately trying to bring back the old one, but it ain't going as smoothly as they hoped. A lot of the racist trash are comparing this garbage penny to Kyle Rittenhouse, and that's because both of them killed innocent people out of racial animus. They also have another thing in common: their trials. A white jury, a prosecutor who clearly didn't want a conviction, and a corrupt white judge who was bending, if not outright ignoring the law in order to engineer an acquittal in advance. And there's a reason that Penny snuck up behind his victim like the coward he is. It's for the same reason that Kyle Rittenhouse was out with an assault rifle the night he committed that mass shooting. Rittenhouse had previously been beating up on white teenage classmates, you'll recall. This is what that punk was doing before he began carrying out mass shootings, and in one instance, this was caught on video. Rittenhouse was beating up some white girls, and then two black teenagers got out of their car, jumped on Rittenhouse, beat him to the ground, and then they laughed as they got in their car and drove off. That was on video. Rittenhouse and his buddies all saw that. It was a few weeks after that public humiliation that Rittenhouse suddenly began looking around for BLM protests that he could go to. Go back in the archives of this channel. I laid out the exact timeline of events of the Kyle Rittenhouse mass shooting one after the other. After Rittenhouse got himself beat down by some real men, you'll recall there was a video right after that where he was shown in a car watching some people running in and out of a store, and he was saying he wished he had his gun. He would murder some people. And then a few weeks later, that's exactly what he did. See, when these white supremacists can't sneak up on their victims, they get the brakes beat off of them. That's what happened in Alabama when you had the riverboat beatdown. Daniel Penny was supposed to be a Marine, but the reality is if he hadn't been able to sneak up behind skinny Jordan Neely, he would never have tried anything. When these white supremacists look at these race soldiers, they identify with them because they all have the same things in common. They're weak cowards who commit racially motivated violence. They all know what would happen if they weren't able to sneak up on their victims. Look at how Patriot Front and other various white supremacist trash get run out of town on a regular basis. Look at the Alabama riverboat beatdown, another example of white supremacists taking a huge L in front of the entire world, and it was because they couldn't sneak up on their victim. The community came together to put some pain on those bastards. These anti-black racists simply cannot take an L, especially not from us. That burns what passes for their rotten, pale little souls. So make no mistake, while for you and me, these occasional beatings that we put on the enemy is merely just another skirmish in the race war they're fighting against us, for the enemy, each of these defeats is a permanent humiliation. Every time they try to close their ugly little eyes, they see us putting some pain on them. They can't erase it and can't forget about it. Because it's not supposed to happen under white supremacy. Black people actually standing up to these white supremacists and putting them in their place, that's something that white supremacy was created to prevent from happening. Trash like Daniel Penny are the reason black people need to carry protection and to have each other's backs in case some other cowardly murderer thinks he's going to try something. In Alabama, the white supremacist jumped a black man and the FBA community had his back and turned a white supremacist ambush into a white supremacist defeat. But understand, the police were right there in Alabama when that attack took place and they did absolutely nothing about it. They were standing back. See, it falls to the community to put down these threats. It teaches the police that we're not going to sit on our hands while they let these vermin roam on the loose. And it teaches these white supremacists that the uniformed race soldiers can't protect them. But this entire thing was organized from the beginning. From the refusal of the authorities in New York to bring charges to the refusal of the white media to publish the killer's name. Now here's what needs to be remembered most. This all happened in the liberal Democrat stronghold of New York. This is how they try to describe themselves, just like California. another bastion of anti-black racism. You had the so-called black Democrat mayor of New York who was leading the charge to praise this murder, and a white woman Democrat governor who also praised and justified this killing, and a Democrat as president who did nothing about it, and all these allegedly liberal white media outlets who circled the wagons to protect a criminal they knew was guilty. Now, tell me, how is this any different than what you would expect from a Republican like Ron DeSantis or a reprobate like Greg Abbott? Anti-black racism is a bipartisan sport. This was a rigged murder from start to finish, but these anti-black racists need something, anything they can point to as a win because they've been getting their butts handed to them so regularly. These politicians have been getting humiliated by people at the grassroots, and that's not supposed to happen under white supremacy. Kathy Hochul didn't think that there would ever be the kind of backlash that she received when she justified this murder, but it happened, and it grew until she was forced to have to eat her own words. She didn't like that. It's like in Minneapolis, that putrid mayor they got tried to defend the murder of George Floyd 4 years ago, and when the people gathered in downtown for a rally, the mayor was told to stand against police violence, and he said no. The entire crowd then began shouting at him to go home, and he had to take the ultimate walk of shame being broadcast live before the entire world. Keep in mind, he never forgot that. How could he? He's still mayor today, by the way. And as I detailed for you in my November 1st crime report, the mayor of Minneapolis stood literally right beside that racist police chief in blaming a black resident for being shot and nearly killed by a white supremacist who the police deliberately and intentionally allowed to remain on the loose. And when the public said that the police chief needed to be fired, the mayor said he wouldn't do anything. This is what's going on in the minds of these Democrat politicians when black folks stand up for themselves and when it comes time to hold these white supremacists to account. So while the enemy doesn't talk about it because it's too painful, make no mistake, when you humiliate these white supremacists, they remember it. Be it the mayor of Minneapolis, the mayor of New York, the governor of New York, or even the president of these United States. As they see it, they're untouchable, at least they're supposed to be. Certainly black people are not supposed to do anything that actually reaches the bastards. We're definitely not supposed to be able to make them do anything they don't want to do. And then you go and force the bastards to bow down. This is why white power is so obsessed with control, so that they can choose winners and losers in all circumstances, especially when it comes to the so-called courts. You cannot claim to have a justice system when the only thing it ever produces is predetermined injustice, laws that are categorically ignored when it suits them, and then they pretend as if they're adhering to them, but only if there's a black person on trial, and even then, the outcome is going to be determined based on race, not on the law. That's how they set their system up. White supremacy is a system of goodies, giveaways, but most of all, guarantees. It is supposed to produce the exact same results for the exact same people over and over again. Facts and circumstances be damned. Those who depend on racial privilege are excruciatingly aware of this reality and how much they need it. Now, you're not aware of it as much because you've never needed racial privilege, you've never had it. But they do. They deny it just like a junkie denies their addiction to meth. But their actions tell the tale, and it says that without their racial privilege, they would have nothing. Just understand how killing black people unites the white left and the white right. And when black people stand up for ourselves and protect ourselves, because when we start doing that on a regular basis, we'll be handing both sides of the political spectrum humiliations every single day. And that is what you call justice. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Jeffrey Williams, Wesley Monroe, Bobby Ross, Onan X, and Rahman Mohammed. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.